The September 15th Board of Selectmen's meeting. Just remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. And as we do each meeting, we'd like to just take a moment of silence for our brave servicemen and women that are serving around the world, especially those that are in the Middle East. And I'd just like to add also, since this past week was the 14th anniversary of the events surrounding 9/11, that we also take a moment to remember those individuals in the World Trade Towers and over the skies of Pennsylvania and in the Pentagon that lost their lives, and their family members that are still coping with that today. Okay, we have two appointments. One right now at 7 o'clock is a public hearing concerning earth removal violation, Larkin Brothers on North Street, and at 7:15 we have the Board of Health, and that will lead us into a discussion of the Beaver Dam that is on Trustee of Reservation property up off of Hartford Street on Millbrook. And we'll start, I guess, first with the public hearing, and notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held on Tuesday, September 15th at 7 p.m. at the Medfield Townhouse, second floor, 459 Main Street, on the application of Larkin Holdings, LLC, Patrick Larkin, manager, for earth removal of approximately 275 cubic yards consisting of loam and fill, some of which has already been removed without the benefit of the earth removal permit from property located at 90 North Street. Hearing will be held in accordance with Article 12.11, Rules and Regulations governing earth removal in the town of Medfield. And before I ask the Larkin brothers to come to the podium just for a second, that 12.11.1 actually says removal of earth without a valid earth removal permit or in excess of the amount specified in a permit or otherwise in violation of any stated condition of a permit shall be punishable by fines as follow: $100 per cubic yard, each cubic yard constituting a separate violation. Mark, maybe just some advice on the best way to proceed on this. We'll ask the Larkin brothers for a response on this. And then
I would suggest first that they address that issue of whether earth was removed without a permit and the amount of it and the explanation relating to that, and then address that and then deal going forward. I'm not sure there's any more to be removed from what's already, so it's strictly a done deal.
Was there indeed a violation, and what happened with that?
We did remove that earth that you spoke of, strictly because there was no physical place to put it. I mean, it's a small site, and it was a surplus material that couldn't be used for structural or anything else. We did take the material out of there, but my day I came in and got all permits for street opening and what have you. I was told that you couldn't take the material out of town, which we didn't. But there was no, outside entity here. It was just that we didn't physically have any place to put the material. If you've been by the site or driven through the site on a weekend when it's quiet, it's very tight, and we just didn't have the physical real estate to put it, and nor a need for it. So it wasn't a question of being able to pile it somewhere and put it back in because there was no actual place to put it.
Where did you take the material?
Sam White hauled it up.
So you sold it to Sam White?
Sam White took it down his yard, yeah.
Is it common knowledge that permits are needed to remove?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not, I know towns have that ordinance. Some towns have that ordinance, but I mean, it's not traditional.
Would you identify yourself for the record?
Oh, yeah, I'm Chris Clancy from Titan Contractors.
Wouldn't you just make that effort, since many communities do have permits of that, just to make sure before something was removed? I guess is where I'm heading.
Well, I mean, I guess obviously it's a much more visible thing in this town than others. I mean, I've done it in other towns all over the state, and not had an issue with a surplus amount of material. It has to go somewhere, you know? You can't, if you physically can't put it in place or use it in some way, shape, or form, then you have to take it off the site. You have no, there's no.
Mark?
So, did you receive, or did Larkin receive compensation from Sam White for the loan?
No,
None?
none.
How about you? Did your company receive compensation?
No.
You have to pay him to take it?
No,
Was it usable loam?
it was mixed of, you know, loam and fill. It wasn't, you know, 100% loam. It wasn't 100% fill. So the thing is, in a project like this, you're you're generating material every time you do something. You put a sewer line in and you bed it in stone. That takes up volume. Every manhole takes up volume. You dig a foundation and you can't, say, build on what you did. You have to put structural in to bring it up to grade. Now you're adding the structural material to have good bearing. Now you've had to do that, so now you don't have a place to put this other surplus material. And most of it was very general, loomy fill. You know, it wasn't structural material you could use under a building or in a garage or what have you.
I don't think that's an argument, and you certainly make a case. I think the argument, though, is if you're doing work in the community, you would find out what the rules and regulations in that community are before you start doing the work there.
Well,
I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think anybody's doubting that
Right.
you had an issue of where to put that.
right.
But certainly, you know, there's certain rules and regulations. You don't just, I'm sure, in a project, go and just do anything you want. You always check first in a community what the rules and regulations are, I would imagine. I'm not a contractor, but
Sometimes you have an order of conditions, it'll tell you, you know, give you that information. Sometimes you don't. Some towns are adamant about it, some towns are not. It's just one of those, you know, town to town to town, it depends. I mean, project in Walpole, we hauled thousands of yards out of there because it's just surplus to the job. You can't physically put it anyplace.
Well, and I don't doubt that. I just
Yeah.
think whatever you're gonna do, I would check first with the community that you work in to see what the rules and regulations in that community are.
Agreed.
Before you just, you know, take steps. That would
Agreed.
be my advice with that. Mike?
We do have a sign-off sheet that when someone applies for building permit, they have to take around the various departments and sign off on it. And that includes a sign-off on earth removal.
So who has the sign-off sheet? Yeah.
I'm not involved in that process, so.
My name is Michael Larkin with Larkin Holdings. I'm a manager of the company. I think in the traditional sense, it wasn't an earth removal of the property. It wasn't going in, taking material and just taking off site. It was just, as Chris Clancy said, it was just a surplus material being produced on site that was taken to another location in town. So it wasn't as if, you know, traditionally, which is the earth removal kind of bylaw with towns, is that someone's coming into a site, taking a removal and fill or loam and selling it to a third party for profit. This is, again, just surplus material created because of infrastructure, foundation. So it was just, now we're left with a situation where to put it. And with the contours and the way it's set up with the planning board, this extra material would have been more than what the actual site plan called for. So that's really what it was. So I think we're not really going against the intent of the bylaw because we're not trying to go in, get rid of the material and bring it off for profit. It was just surplus material created by infrastructure and foundations on the site.
So will this material ever come back from Simi White back to you?
I don't believe much of anything will come back. If anything, some loan may come back in the very end just to dress up in front of the units. It all depends on when the last foundation's being poured. The next day or so, we'll backfill that, then we're done. Now it's just clean up and loam the yards, and I have a stockpile of loam there. Depends on how far that goes. If I run out, then I gotta have him bring some back to me.
I would guess Sam White at some point then will probably sell that.
So you could have done this.
Probably, and that would then leave town. So, you know, that material I don't think is just gonna stay at Sam White's. I think at some point, probably that will be sold and then it'll be taken out of Medfield. So indirectly, part of the reason of the bylaw is that, you know, the material would stay in town, and this, most of it, it sounds like, eventually probably will leave town. Or
I don't know.
Pete, any comments?
How much was it that was removed?
275 yards.
275?
I think just, in a little bit of fairness of the Larkin brothers, I think they've, up to this point anyhow, been very good neighbors. I know you assisted with the Straw Hat Park. You also, and I personally thank you, put a letter concerned with the amount of trees that were taken down, and it looks like you did a nice job putting those trees along North Street.
Thank you.
And we certainly appreciate that as well. I don't know whether we take this under advisement. We're missing.
Well, it's a public hearing, so you should at least ask if there's anybody in the audience that wants to be heard.
We are missing one of our selectmen that's away on vacation. So is there anybody here that would like to speak on the issue of the earth removal out of the Larkin property on North Street?
Just for your information, I am authorized by the Board of Selectmen to issue an earth removal permit for up to 500 cubic yards on a 7-day permit basis, and Evelyn gets these quite frequently, so this is a fairly standard procedure. There is no prohibition usually when the applicant applies. If it is surplus to the site, they are allowed to take it off. So it's a relatively normal procedure, and it can be expedited if it's under 500 cubic yards. It doesn't require a public hearing before the board. The other thing is that the Larkins, I agree, have been very good. They've been very cooperative with the town, and whenever they've been asked to do something, they've been willing to do it. They do have another subdivision, I understand, that is proposed for up off Hospital Road, which also would have loam on it. So I think we want to make sure that there isn't another transgression of this sort.
My suggestion would be we put this under advisement until we have a full board.
Can't do that
make a
up with a-
decision. We cannot do that?
The problem is Mark will
You'd
not
have to
heard
go,
any of
you'd
it.
have to hear it completely over again.
Oh, okay. Naturally, he's not here.
Could I just ask, Mike, if you have a recommendation for the Board of Selectmen? We don't deal with these very often. I think I've dealt with one in 15 years.
I would say that if you were talking 275 yards, $100 a cubic yard, you're talking about $27,500, which sounds a bit stiff to me. The only one we've had before, we had a violation for earth removal down on Mount Nebo. The Hearthstone or Fairview or Fairmont, I think it was. And the fine at that time was $10,000. I think it probably was somewhat of an oversight, but I think it does need to be recognized that that was a violation. I would think in the order of somewhere around $3,000 to $5,000 would be appropriate.
The one earth removal violation that has happened in the 15 years I've been a selectman was Old Medfield Square, and the fine that time was $5,000. I don't remember how much the amount was.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember that one, but I could be, yeah, that might have been, I was thinking the other one on, off Mount Nebo. Yeah, Eastmount Road, I think it was, Eastmount Road subdivision, and that was 10,000, so.
Okay, that was before me, I think.
So that would be my recommendation, somewhere in $3,000 to $5,000 range.
So you got, go ahead.
Do you want to make a motion to the effect of 5,000?
I would move that, that the fine be $5,000
Could I
instead of,
say something? What if we take the material and bring it up to the Hospital Road project and put it there and leave it there? Take the equivalent back from Samuel White and put it up at Hospital Road, and it's still in Medfield.
Town council, is this legal?
You've obviously got discretion to do whatever you want to do. The maximum is set out in the bylaw, which I would agree is fairly steep. Whether it be legally defensible or not, I don't know, but you certainly have flexibility to do what you want to do on it. Taking into account that they apparently didn't make a profit on this, they didn't sell it for profit. And they understand going forward with pending projects and perhaps even future projects in town that this is the way it is, and the next time that they're gonna be dealt with much more harshly, but, so you have flexibility to deal with what you deal. I would concur with Mr. Sullivan that there should be at least some token payment here, just so that you're sending a message to other developers that we're not gonna just look the other way on these type of things. It's not that it's the fact that you moved it. We've had, actually, as I'm thinking of it, there were two developers, experienced developers here in town that were fine for swapping between subdivisions. And the defense was, well, we didn't know, it was staying in town, we didn't know we were subject to that. Well, you're bound to know, and particularly if you're experienced, that's even more reason. But even if you were inexperienced, you're bound to know what the rules and regulations are. But I would leave that to you, to decide what you think is a reasonable amount.
So given the history that I've experienced as a selectman, and the fact that the one time that we did fine someone for a violation was $5,000, I recognize that you guys have been good citizens to the town, and please understand that we're very appreciative of that. We have the bylaw, and we need to do something when there's a violation. Because of the history of the $5,000 fine the last time that it happened, I would move that we impose the $5,000 fine instead of the $27,500 amount under the bylaw.
I'll second that. Discussion? All in favor?
You guys want to be heard on it at all, or?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Thanks for what you're doing.
Next time.
Next, our Medfield Board of Health, for a general introduction of how the board is doing, what is coming up, and then perhaps the board can hold on, because we'll go right into the main issue, which is dealing with concerns we have on Beaver Dam on Millbrook, in between Hartford Street and Main Street. So if the board chair or the board wants to want to represent the Board of Health and let us know.
Hi, Jen Polinsky, 12 Scott Road. This past year has been a very good one in terms of making progress for the public's health in Medfield. Most specifically, there were two main projects we undertook. The first one, we got two grants to undertake, and that was, the first grant was to conduct a needs assessment in the town around the disposal of sharps, so syringes and other medical implements that are dangerous and hazardous to put in household waste. It's illegal to dispose of them in household waste in the state of Massachusetts, and yet almost more than 80 medications can be administered at home through the use of syringes and other sharps. And that number of medications is only growing. This is an issue for folks with diabetes, folks with recent orthopedic replacements who need to inject heparin, and other folks in town. So, like I said, we wrote a grant and received one from the state of Massachusetts. And last year at Medfield Day, and then in the subsequent several weeks, did a needs assessment as to how many Medfield residents were using sharps, were aware that it was illegal to dispose of in the public waste, in public trash, and what they were doing with their sharps, if anything. We received a number of comments that people were really strapped. They had closets full of containers of sharps that they didn't know where to get rid of, particularly for young children with juvenile diabetes who were injecting 3, 4, 5 times a day. We wrote another grant to fund a sharps disposal kiosk and to have that disposal kiosk serviced on a monthly basis. And based on our needs assessment, we determined the size of the kiosk in order to serve the residents of Medfield, and then how often it needed to be serviced. So we were able to purchase that kiosk, and it has been installed. Currently, I believe it's in the public safety, DPW, pending other arrangements when other available locations, the public safety building that my daughter keeps saying, wow, they're almost done. When are they moving in? So that's been a really nice thing for the town, and something we plan to publicize on Medfield Day as one of the real wins for public health in town, We have a lot of sharps and potentially hazardous materials out of the public trash. The second thing that's been our initiative this year is to revisit and update the tobacco regulations in town. So it had been almost 2 decades since those tobacco regulations had been looked at. Given the influx of e-cigarettes into the market and the rise in youth use of e-cigarettes particularly, and the use in e-cigarette and other products of flavors such as bubblegum, chocolate, purple juice, strawberry juice, etc., we decided to revisit the regulations. We amended those and raised the legal age to purchase tobacco in Medfield from 18 to 21. We also restricted the purchase of e-cigarettes and other nicotine delivery devices to age 21, and made some additional revisions to those regulations. We held a public hearing, I believe it was June, the summer has gotten away from me, in June, heard from the public then and passed those regulations. Those regulations take effect January 1st, 2016, in order to allow businesses in town who do sell tobacco and tobacco products to deplete their stock during that time. Other issues we've dealt with would be, let's see, beavers, the permitting process for livestock, food safety, other public health issues such as flu vaccine and the public health nurse, ticks, Lyme disease, mosquito spraying. Those are the highlights. Welcome any questions.
Yeah, first of all, I think the Board of Health perhaps is, in my mind, one of the most important boards in town, because you guys oversee so many different health areas and so many things that many times we take for granted. We go into a restaurant, we go somewhere else, we take for granted that it's going to be clean facilities, the food will be healthy. So there's an awful lot that you people do in the background. I think that a lot of people I don't think are aware of, and I just want to really emphasize our appreciation for the work you do. I especially congratulate you on the tobacco regs and the changes you've done. I know Pete was a strong advocate of this, and this board had supported those efforts, so thank you on that.
We sent them a letter.
We did. Pete,
Thank
any
you.
thoughts?
I'm very appreciative of everything that you guys on the Board of Health do as well. Basically, we have a whole town of septic systems that are installed under your control, so it's working.
Good, good. Well, thank you. We have a great group.
Can you just introduce your members that are here?
Of course. This is Gabby Harrison, also Marcia Vagler, Bridget Sweet, who's our food safety guru and all public health related environmental inspections and what have you. And then Nancy Bonatti, who's the Board of Administrative Assistant and also a font of institutional memory and knowledge about public health.
Not to put you on the spot, but just out of curiosity, before, for a long time, we had one health agent. Now we've gone to more of a company that checks the septic systems and the food like that. How does that seem to be going from a company versus the one agent?
So I don't have any experience with the one agent. That said, and this is an N of 1, the ability to work with a company allows us to draw on skill sets that may be very strong in one area and not so strong in another. So for example, Bridget knows to the letter all of the food safety code and the animal inspection code and what have you. Then we can bring in someone else for a different skill set from the same company. So I think we maximize our resources in drawing on a company that has those skill sets. Just my opinion.
Is there anything that the Board of Health thinks they need that this board, the Board of Selectmen, could assist in any way, or down the road of where you see the Board of Health going that maybe 2 or 3 years from now, that there might be additional needs in any areas?
It's a good question. I think in some ways we are a reactive board as public health needs change. So a lot of the disease and issues we might see, food safety, animal inspection, septic system inspection, those are going to stay the same. More acute issues like the transmission of a virus like flu or Lyme disease, which is becoming more and more prevalent over time and more dangerous, babesiosis, other toxic bacterial-borne diseases. I think in that sense, then we have to be reactive. And I think we have a good group equipped to do that with knowledge in public health, nursing. I think where we could use more help is in the approving septic plans and being very mindful of that civil engineering and environmental engineering. This is something that we work very hard on, but in speaking about the board's expertise, it's really in the healthcare industry, not in environmental engineering or septic engineering. So.
Do you think down the road then a fifth member that would have some of the civil engineering would be good for the board?
We would welcome that, yes.
We've had that in the past.
Maybe the last thing, unless Pete has something else to add, we're going to go now into the issue of a beaver dam that we have some concerns on. I know the Board of Health has the ability to declare, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, like a health emergency when it's outside of the trapping season. And I think during the actual season, you can also issue another health emergency that can change the type of traps that can be used. Am I correct on that?
Right. So Bridget can speak to that as our guru on all things environmental and beaver, for lack of a better word.
Just a quick question. I keep hearing on the national news about vaccines and that in some communities there's a problem with failure of children to be vaccinated. I know you've been working closely with the schools on this, but do you see that at any time in the future as becoming an issue in Medfield?
You mean parental resistance?
Parental resistance to vaccination, yeah.
Some towns are keeping kids out of school if they're not vaccinated, I know.
Yeah. Gabby can speak to that as well as a pediatric nurse practitioner.
I think that for us to make any movement on that without talking about schools and how they feel, it's on a state-by-state basis. And I think that it would behoove us not to act as an isolated community, but before people really make decisions on this, to find out what other people are doing. I know that we bus kids out, we bring kids in with special needs, with different disabilities, with different things like that. I don't think that this can really be done as an isolated thing. To my knowledge, but I've only been on the board for a short amount of time, we haven't really looked at this in any way, but I think that this is really a comprehensive public health situation that deserves a much broader look and assessment and find out what other communities are doing. I don't think we can work in a vacuum on something. It's even going to the national level. So I think that this is a huge issue.
This can be our next initiative if this is something that folks see. I can tell you anecdotally, as a parent of a newly enrolled kindergartner, you had to have all of your vaccines crossed off.
And I can speak from the other side of the table as a provider and practitioner. We still don't really have much that we can make parents who don't believe in vaccines do them. So there's, this is not just schools, but legislation and different things like that. There's no enforcement for parents who say, we haven't looked at it the way California has here yet, I don't think. So this is really a big thing, and I think it might even be worthwhile to have a town-wide conversation. How do people feel about it? People from your side or something else. because this is really big and it's very important. It has very broad implications and affects all of us down the road.
Other than anecdotally, is there any kind of data that indicates the percentage right now, or do we have to wait for some sort of an outbreak and then there's a reaction
Percentage that what?
that vaccinates versus doesn't? Are there any kind of records kept of
Oh,
that?
goodness. I couldn't quote, but they are knowable numbers.
And there are things like that that are available, who does and who doesn't. There's a lot of good data on a lot of things like that. It's just not something I'm prepared to speak about with any kind of intelligence at this meeting right now.
But it sounds anecdotally, if you had to have your child's vaccines up to date, then apparently the schools are requiring it.
Yes, in town, of course. I don't know, and I would leave that to the legal counsel, whether that is legally defensible if you have a religious exception or a cultural exception or a intellectual exception.
I think-
That is not my background, so I didn't,
I mean, I think first you'd have to have a discussion with the school administration as to what's happening in practice. Whether episodes have even arisen. Maybe it's a non-issue in Medfield.
Yeah.
And maybe it's way more of an issue than we know it is. But until you do a preliminary inquiry, you just don't know.
Okay, thank you.
So Bridget can speak to the Beaver Regulations.
And then that will give us a chance to get right into the main part of our meeting.
And can I just ask Bridget, first of all, does your company then do the septic system
Yes, sir.
approvals as well?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, great.
The Beaver regulation is sort of difficult because it's a Massachusetts state law that they oversee, and then health officials are charged with deciding if there is an imminent threat to public health. If we decide there is, then they don't get involved. If we say there isn't, the state gets contacted as they can petition against it, they can come out and do site visits with us to determine if there is a legitimate threat to health and safety. It's really,
I'm
really
sorry,
defined.
Bridget, you said they can petition against it?
Well, so we had a homeowner come out that applied for a beaver permit because they had some flooding on their property. I went out and did an initial assessment. There was very small flooding, but given the very strict guidelines on the guidance document, I couldn't say that it was an immediate threat to health and safety.
Okay, so the
So
homeowner
at that
has-
time, the homeowner went to the state.
Okay,
The
so
state
they can-
contacted Nancy and I. We did a joint inspection. They did the same thing I did, took pictures, did a walk, and 3 days later told the homeowner same thing. It wasn't an imminent threat to health and safety. So that's
So
really
you and the
the
state
only.
agreed then in that instance? Yep, okay.
In that instance. It is pretty well defined. So the threats to human health and safety include occupancy of a public water supply, beaver cause flooding of drinking water wells, well fields, or water pumping stations, beaver cause flooding of sewage beds, septic systems, or sewage pumping stations, beaver cause flooding of public or private ways, driveways, railways, or airport runway or taxi, flooding of electrical gas generation plants, affecting the use of hospitals, affecting hazardous waste site facilities, or gnawing, chewing, damaging electrical or gas generation, and any instability on the property owned by an applicant. So we'll go out and we'll do a walk, and we'll assess that, and if one of these are met, we'll go ahead and we'll issue the 10-day permit. The Board of Health only has approval for 10-day emergency permits. After that, Division of Fisheries and Wildlife gets involved,
So you can issue how many permits? 2?
too.
And then after that, if they want a third, they would have to go to the state.
Correct.
During the actual trapping season, do you have the ability to say the type of traps that can be used?
The traps are approved at the state level already. It's a conibear. I have them all here. I think I could find it. They're approved. We don't necessarily say which types that you have to use. For 10-day permits, you're allowed the use of a body gripping, for example, conibear, box, or cage type trap. Breaching of dams, dikes, bogs, or berms in accordance with the Conservation Commission's approval, specifications, authorization set forth, and employing any non-lethal management or water flow devices, again, in accordance with the Conservation Commission.
Okay, so those are set by the state, the type of traps, and there's a list of that they can
Correct.
use.
It's through the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife.
Okay. Thank you. If the Board of Health wants to maybe hang on just a little bit, what we're going to do now, I think the point of the meeting we're going to have right now is to see in my mind, if we can address a number of serious concerns that the town of Medfield has regarding the building of a substantial beaver dam on Millbrook on property owned by the trustees of the reservation.
Medfield TV.